It's not like I married a stranger. Honey, we all marry strangers.
You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Szymanski with Rami Amuthin. Nisreen Abdelmajid is our technical producer. That was a quote from Beware the Woman by Meagan Abbot, and Rams, this one makes me feel so paranoid. Like, I'd never really know the people that I think I know. That's the vibe that I get, and I feel like it's very representative of the book, which we will be reviewing in the second half with Sara Hillis. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is just one of many, many quotes and lines and just writing throughout the book that makes you feel unsettled. It's very, very eerie. And as we tape this episode, it's like dreary and rainy and miserable outside as well. So it's just like perfect. But yeah, it kind of gives you chills. And the whole book is like this, as you said. It's just one example.
Yeah, it's labeled as a suspense, but I think it's more like a pregnancy horror.
Okay.
That's how I describe it.
That is very specific, but very accurate.
Yeah, it's
also,
accurate, but
this quote, because you said, right, like, you never really know who you think you know, and it is like tenfold true for when you get married, right? Because that is the rest of your life, potentially. And, do you really think about the fact that it is a stranger?
yeah, there's knowing people and then there's knowing people, right? It takes a long time. There's levels to this. But before we get to the review of that book, we want to spend some time with Karen, McKay, and Theresa Power of the Center for Equitable Library Access for a couple reasons. One, because it's the 10th anniversary of CELA.
Nice.
And two, yeah, happy birthday. And two, we want to talk about literary awards and how they have a huge impact on the publishing business. But first of all, Karen, Theresa, thanks for being on.
Hello.
10 years.
Thanks for
Have
having
either
us.
of you been with CELA for 10 years?
Theresa
Not
has.
quite 10 years. I think I'm going on 7 and a bit at this point.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think I came in when CELA was up and around for at least 3 years or so.
It's so cool, though. I mean, this service is hitting a huge milestone with 10 years. And I feel like in that 10 years, it's become, one of the most well-known places to get books in the community, like in the blind low vision community.
Yeah, and I have to say that it is universally very well regarded from the conversations that I've had with people within the community. But we talk about CELA all the time on this show, and I don't think everybody knows what it is. So I think there's no better people to explain it to those who don't know what CELA does and why it's important to the community. Karen?
I can take that one on. So, CELA is basically like a public library that your neighbors might use. We have a collection of over 1.3 million books available to our users in a variety of formats. And the people who can use CELA are people with print disabilities. So that includes not only the blind and low vision community, but also people with other types of print disabilities, like physical disabilities that make it difficult for them to manipulate traditional print. So somebody maybe with Parkinson's, for example, and also learning disabilities. So people with dyslexia and other sorts of learning disabilities can access our materials as well. And that's one of the sort of the biggest shifts that happened from the previous CNIB library, is that we were able to open up access to these other communities that hadn't had any kind of access to accessible books. And so that's huge. And so we're able to serve sort of a broader community. There's lots of recent StatsCan data that suggests that it's maybe as many as 1 in 5 people who have some kind
Really?
of print
Wow.
disability, which is a huge component of our population. Yeah, and so that's something that we're really proud of, that we're able to offer those services. We are quite well known in the vision and blind and low vision communities, but a little less well known in some of the other ones. And so that's something we're hoping to tackle, over the coming years, to make sure that folks who need our books and can use our books are able to get to them and know about them. So that's why we're really grateful for people like you who help us spread the word, because I think it's really important. And the goal has always been to provide people with choice in their reading, not only in the the content that they're reading, but also in the ways that they're reading. So we have lots of different formats. We have what you might think of that we have, like Braille and print Braille, which are picture books for people who have low vision, and they have the traditional book, and then they've got an overlay of Braille, so that if you've got a child reading with a sighted parent or vice versa, parents and adults can enjoy these
Okay.
books with kids. We also have audiobooks, which are also, very important, but we have quite a variety of titles. And yeah, so we've been really, really pleased over the last couple of years to grow not only the services that we offer, but also, to Theresa's credit, because she does the book shopping for us, really grow our collection and make it a really robust one. I mean, 1.3 million books is a pretty impressive title, or a pretty impressive number, rather.
Huge. And like always growing as well. You take requests and all kinds of things to kind of keep up with the community and what people want to read and listen to. So it's fantastic.
Right. And
all those kudos go to Theresa. She's fantastic at picking out.
Right, and you do a great job that when there's a really, really big book that's coming out, say Spare that came out last year, you guys made sure you had that ASAP. And that's the same case for a lot of these very high profile books coming out any given year. If it was up to me, I'd be giving you all a prize.
We would gratefully accept it. Thank you very much. Does it come with lots of money and a trip somewhere?
A cruise, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, so we're really, really pleased to be celebrating our 10th anniversary, and thank you so much for letting us talk about it a little bit, because as you say, we're fairly well known in this community, but it's really great to be able to spread the word. And if folks have questions, they can just come to our website and find out everything they need to know about how to get
great
access to these
website
books.
Too, very accessible, very user friendly.
Clean layout. Great navigation.
It's a very smooth experience, like searching for books and adding it to your bookshelf. And there are a lot of formats, like you mentioned, but once you get the hang of it, like there's a way to get the format that you need in whichever way you want. It's very flexible. So honestly, I only have good things to say about CELA.
Same.
Thank you very much. Well, and we want to just say thank you to all of our partners. Like, we have a lot of partners in the publishing world that are really great to us and make sure that we have access to their books. Some of them, like Penguin Random House Canada, they've committed to providing us with books they have the opportunity to give to us. So some of them, it's around rights. Some of them they don't have rights to, but anything that they publish that they have access to give to us, they give to us. Like, just here you go. So that's one of the ways that we keep the collection new and fresh, and make sure that we have some of those really important big titles that are coming in. And then Theresa works her magic with lots of other different relationships to make sure that, wherever we can, we meet the reading needs of the people who use our books.
So I wanted to get to literary prizes, because you do see this absolutely everywhere. If you're reading about books, reviews, or looking for new recommendations, you always see this, and they even put it directly in synopsises. When you're looking for new books, they always include it. It's always a flex, and you see them so often that you wonder, like, how many there are these? It's like those old car commercials where every single one without fault always has some sort of award, and it makes you wonder about, like, if this is a bit of a saturated field. But there's no doubt a huge amount of importance put on them. And something one of you brought my attention to was that there seems to be an award for every subgenre, genre, language, and country. So I'm wondering, which are the big awards that Canadians should be paying attention to?
So I think in Canada, awards like the Governor General Awards, the Gillers, the Shaughnessy Cohen Prize, those are all really, really, really big, quite prestigious awards that fet Canadian authors. So I think that if you're a Canadian and you love Canadian literature, and you want to support Canadian literature and kind of get the creme de la creme for these for what's being published, those are probably some of the big ones that you want to follow. There's also like other niche awards as well. The Griffin Poetry Prize is another one. They do a combo of Canadian poetry and international poetry as well for their award. So, if poetry is your thing, and you really, again, want to focus on like Canadian poetry as well, they give you an opportunity to do that too.
And I know that there's an award for specific genres as well. Could you tell us, for example, like if somebody's a big romance fan, which award they should be paying attention to in fantasy, sci-fi? I see linking awards to certain genres.
Right. So for science fiction, I probably point people towards the Hugo Award.
Mm-hmm.
They're not Canadian, but they do celebrate, science fiction fantasy books as well. So if that's like your genre and you're looking for the best of the best, not just like the winners, but like nominees, that's a really great one to follow. If you're like a mystery lover, the Edgar Awards are also really great. And they operate out of a conference called BoucherCon, which I attend frequently. So people can vote. It's the public who votes on nominees for the best of many different categories. And there's also like a award for Western books as well. There's an award for romance too. So there is like a little bit of something, because I do find that people really lean into genres. They say I love mystery and I always read mystery, or I love romance and I always read romance. And so these awards give people who really love and lean into certain genres the opportunity to read and like find the best in that writing.
Mm-hmm. And you briefly mentioned the voting process for one of those, and can you speak to that a little bit? Because there's a lot of ways to approach this. Some of them are voted by readers or a club or people at a convention, and others it's more like a committee type situation where the nomination process is a bit ambiguous. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I can speak to it to the best of my knowledge. So I would say that many of the Canadian awards are voted on by a committee. So what happens is that there's a call for submissions from publishers. They target a specific year range or date range, and then publishers can submit a book or books if they feel like they would be a good candidate for that. And then from that, there is a committee usually that reads and evaluates and then picks the best of those submissions, whether it's, five best or three best or whatever. And I also find that in Canada, at least, many of the people who are on those committees, or a number of people who are on those committees, are actually Canadian authors who have written in that genre, or are previous winners or well-known Canadian authors. So they serve on those committees. And I would say probably the same thing happens for like the Hugo Awards or something like that, where it's publisher submissions, and then a committee of some sort picks the best of the best, and then that's what is shown to the public as long lists or short lists, and then probably from there that committee also picks the best as well.
Mm-hmm. And an interesting dynamic that you'll see is that you need to submit your book to potentially be nominated. And sometimes that involves like paying the award committee. Like you need to pay to potentially be nominated. Of course, that's not all of them, but that's a common process that I've seen. And another thing is that a lot of these awards, you need to be published by a publisher. They automatically disqualify anybody who's self-published, which is a bit of a barrier of entry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's many stories from many different communities where the only option for them has been to be self-publishing because, major publishers or, traditional publishers wouldn't be accepting those. I hope that there's a shift in that. But I would also say that the idea of self-publishing has really changed over the years that I've been doing this job, where what we think of as self-publishing, where people can put stuff on Amazon unedited and all that kind of stuff. People still can do that, but people can also pay if they want to to have a company do all of that stuff, do all the editing, do marketing, put a nice cover on it. It is up to the author's discretion to pay that. It is still considered self-publishing, but I think it
Oh.
takes away a lot of those ideas that people have about self-published books being like full of editing errors
Mm.
and what's the product, like what are we going to get in the end basically. And so
Hmm.
places like so people like that have really taken that out of self-publishing, and I see more and more of these places coming up. But again, like being able to pay for that can also be a barrier for many people as well.
Yeah, I think the stigmas around self-publishing still very much exist, even though you're seeing a lot of not just self-publishing, but I don't know what you would even call them, self-publishing vendors being used in collaboration with other very well-known publishers for the printing process or other things like that. Sorry, Karen, go ahead.
I was just going to say, circling back to how this is plays with awards. Some awards are actually really helpful in getting folks from an unpublished
Mm-hmm.
status
Hmm.
to a published status. So I'm thinking particularly of the Indigenous Voices Awards, which focuses on Indigenous writers, and they have both a published category and an unpublished category, and then they have some other sort of categories for English and French and for Indigenous languages and non-fiction versus fiction, that sort of thing. But they've had some really high profile winners in the published category, but they've also launched some careers or been helpful in launching some careers of folks like Cody Catano, who wrote Half Bads and White Regalia, that book was in a lot of different award long lists or short lists over the last year. So, this award is specifically created to elevate the voices of people with Indigenous backgrounds, whether or not they're published authors or unpublished authors. And so there was also, I believe, that's sort of how the Lambda prizes started. So that's a prize run out of the US, but it's international for the LGBTQ community. And so, they've helped to elevate these authors. They help elevate the need for these sorts of books to mainstream publishers who are starting to pick up on some of the genres that they may have been missing or some of the communities they
Hmm.
may have been missing. So the awards, although there's lots of them, and although they can be, they can focus on the same folks over and over again, some of these sort of niche awards are really moving the whole literary community forward in terms of increasing the diversity of voices that are being published.
Are there any other ways that literary awards affect authors?
I think there's lots. So,
Hmm.
financially is huge. Some of these awards, especially the big ones, are, their prize money is $50,000 or $100,000, which is a huge amount of money for authors. It also helps them just get recognized. So sometimes they'll get an agent or, a new publishing deal or an offer of a job writing. And so that's really important. I think the validation is really important.
Yes, yeah.
Especially in a time where there's so many pulls on our attention and a lot of folks are not reading. Like we talked about this a couple of weeks ago about the percentage of people who don't read. And so, because these awards often make the news or they're well promoted on social media or whatever, we get exposed to new authors, to new books. So I think that that's really important. And one of the benefits for sure of the prizes. And then bringing to our awareness, in Canada in particular, specifics around CanLit, around Indigenous voices, around some of these other sort of niche communities. It encourages us often to sort of reach outside of our reading comfort zone and see what else is out there.
Right.
But I read an interesting thing that for some authors, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword. So if you win a big prize, if you're an author and you win a big prize, and somebody picks it up and you're just not their cup of tea, they may give you a bad review, or they may say this whole award
Right.
is not for me. And
Yeah.
so there's potentially a downside, but I do think that the upsides are generally they sort of outweigh any kind of downsides. But there is that
Right.
piece to it.
There's always a bit of like a counterculture movement when a book becomes overly critically acclaimed. It's kind of like people
Yeah,
pick it up with extremely high expectations and then
exactly.
start to trash it, saying like it wasn't that good, it didn't
That
deserve all
wasn't
this
great.
acclaim,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Because
and we see a lot of the same books over and over again with these different awards. Like quite often, if you're on the long list for the Giller, you're probably also on the long list for a Governor General's or a Writers' Trust award. And so, there is a bit of risk of overexposure and, or as you say, really high expectations for some of these books, which really just need to be read from a perspective of, does it touch you? Does it move you? Does it make you think? Whatever you're reading it for. Um, but yeah, there is sort of that piece as well. Like I love Margaret Atwood. Theresa may have a different opinion, but she doesn't need any more awards in her life. Everybody knows who she is. She's got lots of money. Like she doesn't need awards.
it's like
It would be
Beyonce.
really nice. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
true. Yeah.
It'd be nice to see some, a little bit more diversity in some of these bigger awards, which we are seeing. It's changed even in the 5 or 6 years we've been working with them. It's really changed from limited diversity to quite a diverse set of stories and authors and experiences for most of the major awards.
I did a little bit of research regarding the cash prizes for some of these big awards that you mentioned. The Pulitzer Prize offers $15,000 for the winners of a whole bunch of different categories. So they hand out a lot of money to different authors. The Booker Prize offers £50,000. The Bailey Gifford Prize for nonfiction offers $50,000 as well. Griffin Poetry Prize offers $65,000 for the winner and $10,000 to all the runner-ups. The Wyndham Campbell Literature Prize offers $165,000 to the winner, so that's a whole bunch. And then this one blew my mind, and I double-checked it. This is true. The Nobel Prize in Literature, it varies a little bit, but it's always around 1.1 million every year. That's a game-changing amount of money.
It is. It is. And even in Canada, like the Giller Prize is $100,000. And they also award money for
Wow.
the writers on the short list. So even if you're a runner-up, you still get some money. It's not as significant as 100,000. I can't remember what it is, but I think it's about 10,000 per shortlist entry. And so, $100,000 is enough to take the year off and write. You can buy a house or put a down payment on a house or something. Like it's a substantial amount of money. But even the smaller amounts of money are enough to give you a little bit of boost and to give you some prestige and some just some ability to sort of go out in the world and pitch your work a little bit differently. So, the prize money is significant for a lot of these.
It's obviously, like as we've been talking about here, it's not just about the cash prize, but in certain circumstances, the cash prizes would be potentially more, what do you want to say, beneficial than the other aspects of prestige that come with these prizes. But for how long they've been going, have there ever been any stark changes or upgrades to these prizes and awards, Karen or Theresa?
The Scotiabank Giller Prize did just boost their amounts fairly significantly, like from 50,000 to 100,000, I think.
Okay, that's
Just in the
great.
last
I'm
couple
just
of
thinking
years. So that's a
inflation,
boost.
but no.
Yeah.
Oh, with inflation.
The Writers' Trust Awards also went up, if I'm not mistaken, less than that, but somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 15 to 20. They have different prize amounts for their different awards, so I'm kind of generalizing on that. So yeah, the prize purses for these are often increasing. Some of the niche awards, like the Indigenous Voices Awards, that was funded by a call out actually after another award. There was a community call out to support Indigenous voices and to honor those within their own sort of community. And so most of that money came initially from donations, like $200 donations from folks who said, yeah, I want to support this. So they've distributed about 120,000 since they started 4 or 5 years ago, which is pretty significant. But for most writers, you're not going to make your living off prize money. But I
No.
do think that it's valuable. The other thing I wanted to just sort of touch on with this group, because I think it'd be an interesting thing to talk about, is just what the awards signify about who gets to be a writer and who doesn't. Like, what are the books that we are being that are being promoted to us, and which are the books that we're missing, and who are the writers that we're missing. So
It probably says a
in the,
lot about us, right? It says a
it
lot about the
does.
zeitgeist.
In the States, I don't have any data for Canada, but in the States, 40% of their literary prize winners in sort of the 100 years between, I think it was 1920 to 2020. I'm not 100% sure. They went to an Ivy League school, and
What?
they have
Wow.
yeah. So and if you've got a master's of fine arts in writing, you're white, you have like a 50% chance of, let me read the stat so I get it right.
No
So
way.
49, yeah. So if you have a master's of fine arts, you are 40 times more likely to win a major literary prize if you're white than you are
Wow.
if you're, yeah. And only 66% of prize winners in this century have won a prize without a master's of fine arts. Yeah. So the disparity between educated, elitely educated, and non-educated, and also white and black in the States is pretty phenomenal in terms of prizes and who wins them and who's nominated for them.
Wow, you're really painting a picture of a country club.
Yeah,
Right?
it's yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty it's something that we need to be aware of, and it's why I think it's really important for smaller awards and festivals. We're not touching on festivals so much in this conversation, but the Festival of Literary Diversity, which is run out of Brampton, they do a really great job of bringing otherwise marginalized folks into conversations about their books. They don't do prizes, but they do help elevate their profiles and give them chances to talk to new audiences, which I think is really important. So, it's shifting. Like certainly as I said earlier, the profile of the folks who are winning or nominated for these awards is definitely shifting in favor of more diversity, of experience, of ethnicity, of language, even like we're seeing more translated works coming into some of these. But I still think there's a bit of a way to go.
A friend of mine once told me something that really stuck with me. He said that when you're looking for book recommendations, you should find someone who you generally agree with their reviews. And that way you almost build a rapport with whoever's doing these reviews, and you can find someone that you find trustworthy. And on the reverse side, if you always disagree with somebody's reviews, then you can kind of discount them. And I think that same concept applies to book awards. If you go and read the books that are nominated and awarded the grand prizes, you can find book awards that you almost always agree with, and it's an amazing way to find new books that you will almost certainly enjoy every time.
I agree. And I think that if you read the books before the award is announced, like if you're able to read the shortlist, for example, so you can form your own opinions before you know who the winner is.
Oh, it's kind of fun,
That
yeah.
Yeah, so that gives you a sense of, do I generally agree or not? But the juries change every year, and so I don't know that that would sort of hold true as the same as a reviewer who certainly comes from one perspective. The juries are usually 3 to 5 people, so there's lots of perspectives. But I do agree that the way to find books that you love is to read them. Like just go read the books that you wanna experience, because that's the only way you're going to find the books that you love.
Theresa, any final thoughts?
I think that there are definitely literary awards, Canadian literary awards that favor certain genres, and a lot of them favor more of the serious and literary fiction. So if that's your thing, I think you're probably always going to find books that you're going to read and enjoy. But the good thing I think is that there is a lot of variety, and there are a lot of options if you do look to awards for suggestions for what to read next. So I think the variety is a really good thing for people.
Theresa, Karen, thank you so much.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
That was Karen McKay and Theresa Power of the Center for Equitable Library Access. After the break, we're finally going to be reviewing Beware the Woman by Meagan Abbot with the help of Sara Hillis. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Szymanski. We'll be right back. Welcome back to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Szymanski with Ramya Amuthan. Nisrin Abdel-Majid is our technical producer. Let's move on to our review of Beware the Woman by Meagan Abbot. The quote of the week was, "It's not like I married a stranger. Honey, we all marry strangers." And I love this quote because it's super representative of the book. Sara, you recommended this one. Why did you recommend it? Like, what was it, out of all the books that you read, which I know it's a lot, what was it about this one that made you choose it for us to review today?
Well, it was an interesting book because it's a modern take on what I guess I would call the domestic gothic genre. There's family secrets. There's is my husband who I think he is? That kind of stuff. Am I who I think I am? Like the woman, and it's told from the woman's point of view, which is cool. And her mind is not always totally reliable either. Like her assumptions are not always totally reliable, and unreliable narrators are pretty cool too. Yeah, I don't know. It just was. It struck me. I picked it up. I think I'd heard it on a podcast, and I thought, "Oh, that might be cool." So I picked it up in the summer, and I was like, "Hey, this is just kind of neat and interesting." And yeah,
I think it's pretty safe to say that we all enjoyed this one at the very least. But before we get carried away with the review, Ramya, can you read to us the summary, the synopsis, just so we all get a better
Yes.
idea?
Exactly. There's really no way to put the kind of feeling that you get from reading this book, but here's what it's actually about. Honey, I just want you to have everything you ever wanted. That's what JC's mom always told her, and JC felt like she finally did. Newly married and with a baby on the way, JC and her new husband Jed embark on their first road trip together to visit his father, Dr. Ash, in Michigan's far-flung Upper Peninsula. The moment they arrive in the cozy cottage in the lush woods, JC feels bathed in love by the warm and hospitable Dr. Ash, if less so by his house manager, the enigmatic Mrs. Brandt. But their Edenic first gaze takes a turn when JC has a health scare. Swiftly, vacation activities are scrapped, and all eyes are on JC's condition. At the same time, whispers about Jed's long dead mother and complicated family history seem eerie too. As the days pass, JC begins to feel trapped in the cottage. Her every move surveilled, her body under the looking glass. But are her fears founded, or is it paranoia, or cabin fever, or as it's suggested to her, a stubborn refusal to take necessary precautions? The dense woods surrounding the cottage are full of danger, but are the greater ones inside?
Ooh, this is a 9-hour audiobook, and you can also find it in human narrated audio on CELA, in case you're interested of getting it there. Let's listen to a quick sample to give you an idea what the narration is like.
He stood at the foot of the bed looking at me, his face too dark to see. Only the flicker of the whites of his eyes, wide and wary. Somewhere, a snarl of mosquitoes buzzed, a light sizzling. "Jed," I said, my voice gluey with sleep, his hands clenching at his sides, looking at me as if I were this strange thing, landed in his bed, come to do him harm or wonder. An alien, a ghost, a succubus. Jed, sweet Jed, so nervous.
Nisreen, before we started recording, mentioned that this voice sounded very sexy, which I don't think that's what the narrator was going for.
No.
No, but I felt it.
There's definitely a lot of eeriness just from the performance, but added on, or at least, from the core because of the writing style.
Yeah.
I loved the writing in this book. Absolutely loved it.
yeah.
I thought the performance was there was a lot of like frantic whispering. Not exactly whispering directly into a microphone because that would sound awful, but that type of like acting-y whispering where you can still hear it properly. It was really, really good performance. Spooky, like you said, Ramya.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Are we going to go around the table and rapid fire review this thing? Or did we already do that by saying, we've thoroughly enjoyed it?
No, that's a good idea. I think we can elaborate even if we have 15 seconds each. We don't need to do exactly 15 seconds, but
Yeah.
Sarah, do you know what we mean by our rapid fire review style review?
Sort of.
So you have 15 seconds to give us a spoiler-free, top-of-mind review of how this book left you feeling.
Okay.
You want to go first?
Sure. All right. This book, it was so good because again, there's suspense. It starts out really idyllically, and then there's suspense that just builds really slowly. Even for a short book, it's a slow burn, but it's good. It didn't work, did it?
It was good. Oh, you did well.
It's a good challenge. All right. Ramya, your turn.
Me? Okay. This book, I couldn't read it at night. I did, and I got nightmares. I think the environment played a huge role, the performance of the narrator, but the writing itself was quipped, clean, and very eerie. Ooh.
Good. That was really solid.
Proud of my timing.
I fully agree
That's-
with everything you said.
That's what I wanted to say.
All right, I'll give it a go.
Jacob's turn.
I thought this book was written with a lot of intentionality. The author really knew what she was going for. I thought it was almost too suspenseful at times in the sense that like you were just kind of waiting for the shoe to drop. Like it was a very slow burn, like Sarah said. But in the end, it was totally worth it.
You're right
Wow.
about that.
Well,
Yeah,
let's talk.
you're right
Let's
about
talk
the
about
waiting
that.
and waiting and waiting. Oh. We waited the entire book.
Yeah.
That's how I felt.
But I like those books. Like I like those books where I gotta wait and see, and I know
Yeah.
something's coming. And I'm trying not to give anything away, but the way it goes, it doesn't lead naturally to what it leads naturally in some ways to what happens, but it kind of pops out at you like after all the slow burning, it just kind of something pops out, and all of a sudden it's different. Everything's different, right? Like in some books, you would have a whole bunch of really, really tight foreshadowing and like tons of foreshadowing. And they're like, oh, of course we're going to end up here. And when you do end up where you end up, you kind of say that. But how you get there is sort of interesting. Like just randomly finding a place to be, when you have to escape something. Again, not trying to spoil too much, but no, the thing about this book that I think is cool is that it has, people have compared it to Rosemary's Baby a little bit, the way that it's a slow burn, and you're never quite sure where you are, who's who, what they're really trying to do, and it's told from the point of view of the main character, who's the woman, and we'll say she's pregnant. That's pretty much clear from the outset, so that's fine. She's pregnant, and yeah. So are you having pregnancy, kind of mental issues? Like, why are you saying what you're saying? Do you really know what do you really believe it, or is it your mind playing tricks with you? Like, that's the neat thing about a book like this. It also has shades of what I would call a Rebecca type story by Daphne du Maurier with Mrs. Brandt. She sort of appears like a little bit of a Mrs. Danvers character, who's a spooky housekeeper in Rebecca.
Yeah,
and that's I like that she sort of throws these things, and I think it's intentional. Another thing that runs through the book is a collection of stories called Bedtime Tales of Suspense. It sounds like they're old Victorian stories. I've heard some of them before that she mentions. I don't know if the book actually exists, but probably a book like it does. And so I think she kind of the author sets the plot of this book off against those little plots too, like in an interesting way. You start with a car ride, like they're taking a carriage ride to the old mansion, the ancestral home, and that kind of thing.
That was very much like a trope. It's like a lot of stories start that way, but in a way, it kind of makes it familiar.
it worked.
Yeah, it worked.
It worked
It was
very well.
Right from the get-go, there was a lot of atmosphere there. Can I suggest that we unshackle ourselves from the burden of making this review spoiler-free? Because it's almost impossible to talk about this book without making it spoilery.
Yep, spoilers, all the spoilers.
And I will say, spoilers would make the enjoyment of this book a little tricky, but...
Yeah, so don't listen to the rest of this until you go read it.
Exactly. Okay, so from now on, spoilers ahead. Okay, continue.
Gosh. What do I
So
say?
much more now.
Dr. Ash, as the summary says, Dr. Ash is this kind of older man. He's the father of her husband. He's got this debonair kind of way about him, right? In the beginning. And she's like, ooh, this is sort of neat. I like this. He seemed like a cool guy. Her dad dies when she's young. So she doesn't have a dad growing up. So I think for her, when she meets Dr. Ash, it's kind of like, oh, this is what a dad could be like. How cool is that? And then you get hints from Jed that he's a little bit sort of sadistic. Like he purposely got Jed coshed in the mouth with a fishing hook because he's distracted him when the fish was on the line, and because he wanted to teach Jed a lesson for, I don't know, not fishing right or something, right? It was like, have to teach my son a lesson so he can be a man, that kind of thing, right? And so you learn, and she doesn't really believe Jed. She's like, can he really be like that? He doesn't seem like that. And then you learn more about Dr. Ash as you go on, and I won't tell everything, but because that would ruin the book entirely, and I'm not going to do that. But he isn't this loving, caring guy that you thought he was, right?
Well, you mentioned that he doesn't seem like that, and early on, I was fooled by him. I was like, this guy is so cool.
Really?
He's so nice and suave. I was totally fooled. Yeah, he's
How are
the
you guys
type.
not suspicious of everybody?
No, but that's what I mean. Like I was taken in when I first read it too. And I'm like, where's this gonna go? I mean, I sort of, and then as time went on, you did hear Jed say he's not the dad. You don't know him. You don't know my dad. You don't know who he is. And there's this like what's going on here? I don't know. He seems nice to me. That's what she thinks. And
he seems very elegant, very folksy, kind of old-fashioned, but he's a very, very smooth talker and just very warm and welcoming. That's the vibe that I got from him. But then slowly, through his actions and the small details that Meagan Abbot writes of his behavior, just kind of makes you question him a little bit. What is his deal? This is weird. That he's living almost alone in this weird cottage in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Well, maybe exactly. Maybe it's all of that, the environment and but to be honest, my suspicions from the start with him were because of the way that his son was describing him. The way that Jed would just kind of say a line here or there, and the way that, you could tell JC was really trying to get to know him and his family, right? Or his dad, but try to get to know Jed through his dad. I felt like there was something very off about this father-son relationship.
Yeah. Jed was always nervous and stuff. And trying not to put a foot wrong kind of thing. And then, so when JC has she bleeds, she's pregnant, and she's in her second trimester or something. And she has bleeding. So they go to the doctor, and he's a country doctor. And he's also Dr. Ash's friend. And Dr. Ash mysteriously quit practicing after his wife died. He said, I couldn't do it anymore. That's how he put it. I couldn't do it after his wife died. Having Jed, basically, is what he says. And that's pretty much in the beginning of the book. So again, I'm not spoiling too much, but so she has this bleeding, and then we get into this men versus women thing that runs through the book. All the men start talking about JC and her body without talking to JC about her body. And so she's forever contacting her own gynecologist in New York or wherever. And yes, New York, and her mom, to kind of keep talking to other women to keep her head straight when all these men are trying to make decisions for her. And that's an interesting trope too in the book.
Right. They talk about how there's like three men conferring in a room where she's not present, talking about like how to handle the pregnancy, and it's
Yeah.
very uncomfortable. And she finds out later that Dr. Ash seems to withhold information about like how dangerous this bleeding was and how it really isn't that big a deal, and that it more often than not fixes itself on its own.
Yeah. Yeah, he wants to protect her. He keeps saying, Dr. Ash, but
Right.
it's as we find out, it's more about the baby. He wants to protect the baby, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
and that's the thing. It starts out so innocent. He's like treating her in a
And
way
he's a
that-
doctor.
Yeah, he's a doctor. Yeah. You would think that he knows what he's talking about, but it starts out so innocent. Like JC notices that she's the only one who, at the dinner table, her chair has a cushion on there, and they refuse to let her drive or be in a car because it's too bumpy, so they delay the trip back home. It starts out very innocent and reasonable, but it progressively gets more and more controlling to the point where JC starts to freak out. And even as,
Yeah.
because it's a first-person book from JC's point of view, she becomes more and more like unsettled, and it really, really adds to the buildup of this book.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's in the woods, so you've got all the, are there animals out there ready to, strike and kill people?
Mm.
They're looking for mountain lions.
loved-
They're looking for that whole thing. Yeah, it's
Mrs.
so that's
Brandt's knowledge on that stuff was quite intriguing.
yeah,
Because she would just step in with a line or two here and there. And you couldn't tell for the longest time if Mrs. Brandt was a friend or an enemy of JC. Even when
Yeah, she was very well
she
written.
was, yes, you really couldn't. And, obviously a lot of that is because of her character herself. She was always kind of arm's length, distant from the rest of the crew while people were, amicably interacting, having fun, having drinks,
She was
settling
creepy.
in. She was,
Yeah.
she was kind of lingering in the background, or would come in and step aside and with her hands folded and her skirts ironed. Like, it was just a kind of a statue. But, then she started giving the, what do you call those pies?
pasties,
The
Cornish pasties.
pasties. Yes. When she started bringing those in, I was like, is she trying to poison her? What's going on here? There
Very
was a lot
suspicious,
going
eh?
on.
I was thinking of
Very.
Rosemary's Baby, where they tried to drug
Right.
Rosemary, right? Like,
Yeah. Like, you honestly, till the end, couldn't tell if Mrs. Brandt was a friend or not, because she did some suspicious stuff, like giving her the robe of the dead mother of Jed without JC realizing that that's where the robe had come from.
Again,
Until
a
the
little
father
echo of-
commented on it.
a little echo of Daphne du Maurier there with Rebecca. Interesting.
Huh.
Because the second wife, who's not named but she's the protagonist, she gets Mrs. Danvers tells her to get a dress and put this for your costume for the ball, and it's Rebecca's dress, and Maxim, her husband, freaks out. But Mrs. Danvers was trying to make this woman basically kill herself because Rebecca was better than you, and she was
Yeah.
a pretty crazy person. But
Yeah. Unreal. I gotta go read Rebecca after this. But yeah, there were things like that where Mrs. Brandt was, the most interesting character, but also just the most unsettling part of this book for me.
Because she very clearly knew what was going on. She was just withholding
everything.
information. She knew everything
She knew
from the
everything.
start. Mm.
Yes. More than
as we find
anybody
out-
else in this
Yeah.
book.
as we
Mhm.
find out, she knows more than Dr. Ash even.
Exactly.
That's true.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Ash was definitely my favorite character in this. I thought he was super creepy once you find out what he's all about. And as it turns out, he's an absolutely sadistic psychopath. That's how I describe him.
Yeah.
Basically.
Very clearly.
Really good
Yeah.
ending, too. And if I'm going to give a negative, it's that I think Ramya agrees with me on this. And that's that there were definitely some pacing issues because it was a 9-hour book, but it's still a bit of a slow burn. My problem is that it slowly adds more and more tension. And you kind of start to understand what's happening. Like, okay, they're getting more and more controlling with her pregnancy. They don't trust her. But as you realize what's happening, it just keeps building up and keeps building up and keeps building up. And it just feels redundant at a certain point. Like, I just feel like it almost overdid it a little bit. This book could have been even shorter. That said, the ending was great. I really enjoyed the ending.
I think the redundancy came for me with JC's freakouts. Like, she was like, how could they be doing this? I am so isolated. I got to get out of here. Mom, help me. Mom, you're not here for me. Like, that part of it felt, you know, like it was cycling back. And I thought at one point, hey, are we going to do something, JC? Like, and I understand there was still a buildup, a relatively slow burn, as you said, Jacob. And it made sense for it to be that way because you got characters who are not necessarily telling us everything. Then we have characters who we're not sure how involved they are, like that other doctor, right? The Dr. Ash's friend doctor.
Yeah.
I had no idea how involved he was. Then you got the friend of Jed, who's like, this like fun-loving dude. But then later we find out that there was more history there with him as well. But you would have never known that because his character was so light and lighthearted, presented that way throughout the book. So I guess there is, upon reflection, there's a reason why it went on as long as it did. But during the read, it felt long.
Yeah, for me, like if you're going day by day, if you're in a muddle like that, every day you're going to have the same thoughts.
Absolutely.
You haven't fixed it.
Yes. It makes logistical sense.
But yeah, I don't know.
And especially for the psychological impact that this was having on JC. I think that was quite well presented.
Yeah, after a while I was like, could we just get to the point, please?
Yeah.
Like I did sort of feel that way, I have to say.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think when we read books, we don't necessarily always remember what happens, especially because we're reading tons of books every year. We just don't have that much room in our brains, speaking for myself. But what we do remember is how books like left us feeling by the end. And how did this book left you feeling by the time you were finished reading it, Ramya?
I agree that the ending was good. It felt pretty abrupt though, like the way that everything came up, like, whoa, we meet the mom, whoa, they're all dead, oh my goodness, like what's happening here, kind of thing. So it felt very sharp, or but I think the rest of the book sits with me more than the end. And I mean that because of the writing. Like the quality of writing, the way that this whole thing was kind of just very unsettling. I still felt that way even though the book was over. So everything was capped nicely, but that feeling of like, wow, this felt deep and uncomfortable is how I continue to feel.
A great atmosphere. Sarah?
Yeah.
Well, I felt more kind of triumphant at the end because the women and the one guy were getting together and they were gonna fix it all, like they were gonna get things dealt with, kind of deal. And I felt that way, but I agree the unsettled nature of everything was very. I mean, some of the descriptions were just like
I know,
graphic and horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a huge part of the creeping atmosphere and just feeling unsettled was just how much information was being withheld. And because it was written from a first-person point of view, you could really relate with JC's frustration.
Yeah, even when she tried to tell people stuff, the men folk weren't really listening. And then she thinks they found something out about her, and they said they never found it out about her, so she told them what she thought they knew already, and then she felt worse. Like, oh man.
Yeah, silly menfolk.
Well, it was a great recommendation.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you so much for the recommendation, Sarah.
No problem.
I give it a 4 out of 5 stars.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Yeah, I may have said 5 on
4 or
Goodreads,
5.
but four makes sense.
Oh, okay. Clawing back 1 star. Okay, that's fine. Thank you so much, Sarah.
No problem.
That was Sara Hillis. She's one of our regular contributors. She's the one that recommended this book to us, Beware the Woman by Meagan Abbot. You can find it on CELA in human narrated audio if you want. What are we talking about next week? we're reviewing 1984, Audible's adaptation of 1984. This is almost a radio play style production, very high production value. I thought it was a really, really cool project. So we're going to be giving a review of that. And after, Ryan Huey is coming on to do a rapid fire review. We have a question for the book club also. What's the last book that made you cry? And what is it specifically about the passage that did it for you? So what's the last book that made you cry? You can answer by sending us an email to feedback@ami.ca, or you can call us toll-free at 1-866-509-4545. I'm Jacob Szymanski with Ramya Amuthan. Our guest was Sara Hillis, and our technical producer is Nisreen Abdelmajid. Happy audiobook listening.